the last session, or rather the keynote session, closing keynote session of the day 2 of API Days Dubai and Middle East. The topic is digital transformation, potential pitfalls, protection, and privacy enhancing techniques. Joining us to talk about all these are Sonal Rattan, co-founder and CTO at eXate, and Dr. Frederick Purcell, developer advocate at eXate.
Hi, thanks, Prashant. Thanks for having us. We're absolutely thrilled to be here.
Yeah, great. Yes. So you both are visible, audio, video is fine, and your slides I can see. Okay, stage is yours.
All right, thank you so much. So again, thank you, Dubai, and thanks for the best of the Middle East to come and join us today and listen to us about digital transformation, the potential pitfalls, protection, and privacy enhancing techniques. And between Fred and I, we'll be covering some of the content throughout the rest of the talk. So who are we? Why should you really listen to us? I think that's usually the first good place to start. I'm Sonal. I'm the co-founder and the CTO for eXate. My background predominantly has been around software engineering and then leading teams of software engineers. Prior to setting up eXate, I was leading some of the digital transformation initiatives for HSBC for their corporate and institutional bank, and came across so many different issues when it came to APIs, scaling applications at a global scale, and some of the nuances when you're working in banks as well. I know yesterday was focused more on that open banking side, and today is more about digital transformation. But hopefully you'll glean from some of our experiences collectively from myself and some of our other people in our organization, and our thinking around what needs to happen to make this a little bit easier. So generally, our vision as a company is to be the global and standard and for the secure and trusted exchange of data. So what does that mean? As an industry, we recognize that we need to be faster, and we need to make it easier to find and consume data. And we've seen a huge rise in APIs off the back of that. But some of the challenges have been around being able to reuse APIs. So one of the pitfalls that we were seeing in my journey at HSBC is we ended up creating multiple objects for customer objects, because we not only had we had one department that needed it for one thing, we needed another application that needed it for another thing. There were certain restrictions on what we can do on mobiles with that information. So what we ended up doing is building all of these hundreds of services that were like a variant of the same thing. But what we want to do is we don't want to keep rebuilding these things. So how do we actually start using some of these data protection techniques, and how we use privacy to actually even reduce some of that? But the main gist of it is that it needs to be fast, it definitely needs to be easy, and it needs to be centralized. So if you are doing large scale programs around the APIs, we're going to talk you through some of the things that we've actually been through. And one of the big parts of it is what were some of the things that we wished we did better? What could we have? What did we wish we had done, and what we had forethought? And then how we can use privacy and protection to actually help us, not only from a business perspective, but actually meet those regulations as well. So we know that API security is going to be a key focus area for most organizations. Just listening to the previous talk, we recognize that this is just getting more and more notice. We're seeing more and more of it becoming its own segment. But there are some of the pitfalls that also go with it. So we'll just talk about a few of them. That we know that unmanaged and unsecure APIs are going to create vulnerabilities that are going to exceed multi-million dollars of security incidents. And we're already starting to see these. And we're going to talk through some of those examples as we go through the rest of this talk. By 2025, less than 50% of enterprise APIs will be managed, which means 50% is not managed. The fact that it's not managed and the amount of breaches that we're seeing that are coming from APIs, it's probably worth thinking about these things as a forefront as opposed to an afterthought, because when it's usually an afterthought, somebody's going to lose their job. But looking at some of the regulations that are in the Middle East, actually some of the consequences are not just losing your job. there's some gel time associated with it as well. So, it's really something that it's just worth considering to start with, to having those good design architectural patterns into your gateways, into your APIs from the outset. And like we said, API security is its own segment, but there was a talk at one of the Apidays events where Mehdi said, data API security is its own segment, but privacy will be the differentiator. And that's some of the things that we're going to talk about. But why is privacy going to be a differentiator? Why do you care about privacy? How can we make it easier? Because nobody wants to learn all of this stuff over and over again and have every one of your developers trained up on this. So how do we actually think of more smarter ways of being able to do this? So like gleaning from what some of these pitfalls that we've been talking about is, where APIs have been that solution for digital transformation, it's allowing us to consume data in ways that we've never been able to do before, or it's just been really quite painful to do so. But from the solution, it's also becoming the problem. So why is it becoming the problem? So data in motion, Gartner now is saying that APIs are the most frequent attack vector. So if that's where your attacks are coming in from, it's clearly we need to be doing something about this, considering 91% of organizations have had some sort of security incident when it's involving APIs. Just, again, it's worth just appreciating that this isn't going to happen to your neighbor. Most people this is happening to most organizations today. So where the gateways are helping you, to reiterate the previous talk, where they will help you, they're not going to completely solve some of your challenges around managing what data is going on where, because breaches are not just necessarily to do. And we're going to talk about some examples about why certain things are not just about someone attacking your API and just getting all the information. It's what are you using the information for as well. Just to appreciate what are the main drivers for these like data privacy regulations and why are we actually looking about it. First and foremost, it's regulatory risk. So we do have 80% of the countries in the world are going to be having some sort of degree of data protection regulation. So that's 2/3 of the world's population is going to be by 2025 or 2023, they will be covered under some sort of data protection regulation. So irrespective of where you are, this is definitely something that should be on everyone's radar. There is that digital risk. We know that COVID has accelerated the pace of change. We've had to work differently. We've had to go at a pace that we've never had to go before, and it's literally going in dog years at the moment. But that does mean that certain controls might be lacked. To get things out as fast as possible, you do a risk-based approach on it and decide what can go for now and take it from there. But it's really, really important to understand that 87% of individuals said they will not do business with a company that they don't trust their security practices. So you don't want to be that company that is out in the press to say, yes, we've exposed data. I think that, especially for some of those conservative organizations, you want to start thinking about these things from the outset, thinking about these architecturally from design patterns perspective. How do we actually get to a position where we're in a place that we don't end up being in that, where that 87% is moving away from other organizations and coming to you. So think of it almost like a competitive advantage. The interesting stat that we also found is that 94% of companies are now providing privacy metrics to their board. So this isn't just about cyber risks anymore. It's not just about DDoS attacks and all of those things. This is privacy metrics. This is what is actually happening from your customers' data's perspective. So it's just, this is going to board level. There's very, to have your API programs not actually, to be able to provide those metrics in a good manner, it's worth thinking about the good hygiene standards that you might want to get in there from the outset. So let's look at the local region and some of the regulations that are coming into force or already in force. So we've spoken to some people in the UAE as well. Some of our clients are in the banking space. And so we've been going through a lot of the regulations and trying to learn a little bit more about what they're actually doing. So we've got the CPR, and we know that there's almost like the general data protection type of regulation as well, the data protection regulation, which are following some of those exact same principles that you're seeing in the West with GDPR and sorry, I've completely lost what the acronym is. Fred, what is the acronym for the regulation in the States?
Just PII.
When we're looking at PII data, the regulations in the state where it's looking at it from a state-by-state perspective, we also are seeing, generally in the States, looking at the West, they're now trying to consolidate the region, just like the EU have done, and creating that general regulation. But we can see that Saudi Arabia's got their version of it, Turkey, Bahrain, and Qatar. So just thinking about some of the main participants that are in the audiences today, we'll just cover a few of the main key points for these different regulations. So looking at UAE, we know that it's a multi-layered system. There's general things that that from a consumer perspective, like you need a customer's consent before you share data to a third party. You can't market to them without their knowledge and consent. All of those good things that come with a good data protection regulation. And there are some more nuanced and stronger regulations around regulated industry, especially around healthcare and for banking. Saudi Arabia as well, it's got some serious fines in there. One of the one that struck me was for cross-border data transfers, for any violation on sending data outside of your jurisdiction. What are the fines associated with it? So the fine is maximum 1 million riyals, but it's potentially accompanied with 1 year in prison. So they're not messing around with this. This is very, very serious for organizations where they don't want their data being sent out, and the consequences of getting it wrong are quite severe. So it's, again, ensuring that those good design patterns are in place. Just quickly to whiz through, because Fred's got some much more interesting things to talk about than I have right now. Turkey's got its variant with some of these, like right of erasure, anonymization, and we're going to talk. So Fred's going to talk about anonymization in a little while, and what does anonymization actually mean? It's quite important. The amount of people that we speak to that think encryption is anonymization, is probably just worth just clarifying that in case the audience don't know, because there are so many people that we come across in our day jobs that they use them interchangeably. And then finally, Bahrain, same sort of thing. Again, more of the same. All of them roughly have the same thing that's associated with it. Marketing, looking at rights of a data subject, how you're using data, what are you using it for. It is generally the same things, good practices, and you could get a good framework in place that follows all of those, especially if you're marketing to the whole region. So just a couple of stats before we move on. So I like this: data protection is the law. There are legal consequences for getting it incorrectly. So we just like to talk about Wycart, which is a small company that's in like a small to medium-sized company in the States. They got a breach. They had a breach, and it was for 1.2 million. It was just more interesting to hear what the attorney that was prosecuting, what he had to say. He was just saying that this settlement should send a clear message to companies that skimp on data security as a cost-saving measure. It's not a cost-saving measure. It's actually the law. You have to do it. So it's just worth, again, just absorbing that part of it. It's just quite a powerful statement. So we like the way that it's described. It is the law, but it's not just about breaches. It's what you're using the data for. So this is a really fascinating thing that I find it fascinating. Most of you might be completely over these sort of things, but Twitter was fined $150 million for using mobile phone numbers to market to their clients, but they collected it for multi-factor authentication. So they collected information under the premise that we need it to multi-factor authentication. We'll send you a text message and then we'll let you into the system. Somebody found that telephone number and said, oh, wouldn't it be great to market to them? We're a marketing company. We advertise. That's what we do. Why don't we actually use those numbers for it? And you can see that completely happening in any organization. You find data and say, oh, I could use that. But using that could potentially be a $150 million penalty, because you're misrepresenting why you're collecting the data and what you're going to use it for. And you're not, before you're marketing to them, you're not consented for that. But they may have consented for marketing, but they didn't consent for you to use their mobile phone. They didn't say you could be targeting them in that particular way. So it's more about what are you using the data for? What did you collect it for? And then being able to marry that up. And doing that is not as simple as it sounds. Finally, a little bit about us. No one in the history of Everness has said this is easy. No one has ever said that it's not going to be a challenge. It's not, but securing data is hard. Doing all of these role-based access, attribute-based access, customer-based access, all of these things are hard. And what we're trying to do is make it easy. In a nutshell, what we do as a company is we're a software platform that enforces data protection between APIs, applications, and databases in its most simplistic form, like Ronseal on the tin. This is what we do as a company. That is it. But we call it smart data privacy for a reason, because we're trying to find smarter ways of being able to do that. And then I'm going to hand over to Dr. Fred in a minute, that is much, much smarter than I am, and that is going to tell you why we see this as smart data privacy. And if you want to see and try out our APIs, you please go ahead and go to developer.eXate.co and try out our APIs. With that, I'm going to hand over to you, Fred.
Thank you very much for that big intro. I hope I was able to live up to that today. So a little bit about my background. I'm a solutions owner at eXate, where, as someone mentioned, we're working on some of the most challenging problems of data privacy. My academic background has been around big data analysis. So I really understand how important it is to have the right data and have as much data as you can get to get those insights. And we see this in industry as well. We see digital innovation increasing, and with that, the demand for access to data is also increasing. So there are a couple of key questions we have to ask ourselves around this, and key questions that we've asked ourselves when we've sort of gone back to first principles and thought through this in the context of API, which is sort of, do you know who's actually accessing your data? And are you creating different interfaces for each of these people? So are you creating duplicates and different variations of all kinds of patterns to service these different needs? And how does that then allow you to make your API program scalable without scaling your risk at the same factor of growth as you're scaling your APIs? Because we all want to see lots of APIs, and our previous speaker, we saw those lovely graphs of how API use is scaling so brilliantly. But what we want to do is we want to prevent risk scaling alongside that. We then also want to ensure that our API consumers are compliant with data regulations. And as Sonal so nicely laid out just there, that varies where you are, where you're sharing. And if you're a company who's operating in a multinational domain, this can become really quite hard and really quite complex and become quite messy quite quickly. So if we jump to the next slide. So what we want to do here is just have a little bit of a jump back to first principles and think about how we set up our APIs, and are there actually ways we can do this better by thinking about the way we do our privacy potentially slightly differently. So this sort of our V1 API, you have our API producer, we have a consumer, and we have a gateway in the middle, and it's happy days. People are getting the data, we have control, we have oversight, and everything is flowing very smoothly. We then jump forward to our next step where it's running so smoothly. People want more data. People want more data. We have more consumers. We have requests for different types of data. So we now have balance and accounts and all these different kind of products that are there. The issue now becomes that we need different variations of what is essentially the same API for our different consumers. So we end up building accounts EU and accounts Luxembourg, depending on who wants to consume this data. And this is all still running through our gateway. And this very quickly starts becoming an absolute nightmare in terms of scaling. When we want to build this out, we are then starting to very quickly hit a point where we will lose control and will not be able to manage this properly. So we then take the next step to sort of what we would consider V3, or the mesh, which has obviously got great excitement and fundamentally solves a lot of these problems that we have around that gateway model, where we have this discovery channel. We no longer need to manually map our consumers to map proxies. We no longer need to manually do any routing. And we have common service definitions. So the discovery service can route all our users to our correct services. And this is absolutely fantastic and really solves a lot of these key problems. But the thing that we've discovered with this model as a real limitation is that we now lose the visibility, we lose the oversight. And as Sonal laid out there, it's so important for us to know where things are going and who's using it and for what reason they're using it. Whereas now we have this mapping in the discovery service that is being done on a large extent automatically, which is obviously how it's solving the problems. But that, as us as the people who are wanting to manage the service, becomes a real problem. So what we've done here at eXate is we've really taken a step back, and we want to think about this again from first principles. So what do we do if we have an API producer and a consumer, and we have a gateway? Well, what we can do is we can think about actually taking data privacy and governance and compliance out of this, and simplifying this whole process. So we wrap this governance step around the gateway, and then we don't really have to worry about it within our APIs anymore. So when we start scaling this to the next level, and we add more consumers and we add more products. So we can go to the next slide, Sonal. Thank you. Yeah, so we start scaling this. We then are able to have common product definitions, and we are able to still inject this governance at the gateway layer, and we are now able to abstract the governance away from the APIs themselves. So we no longer have 4 variations of accounts and 6 variations of customers, depending on where they're going to and who they're going to. We no longer have customer marketing and customer security, which is obviously what Twitter clearly needs, because security information was in an API that was being accessed by people in marketing. We no longer have to build this out and have this issue, because all this governance and compliance is built into the gateway. So where do we go with this? How do we think about this as a whole approach, as a holistic approach, really? So what we've sort of built out is this fast model here. So what we want to do is we want to locate and classify our API traffic, which is obviously the first step. We need to know what's going on, and then we need to analyze that traffic. So we need to learn about the data in it, we need to understand what data is in it, and we need to understand the risk associated with that. So back to that Twitter example, we need to understand that the phone number's there, what it is, and what the risk associated with sharing that in the wrong context is. In Twitter's context, obviously a very, very hefty fine. We then need to solve that risk, so we need to do something about it. So depending on where that data is going, we need to do different things about it. This solve is something that I'm particularly interested in. What can we do with this data? Because the way we solve it is also very important in allowing us still to get as much information out of the data as possible, which obviously is what we're all here about. We want to learn from our data, use our data, and utilize it as best possible. And then we need to test. This is not a one and done sort of approach. It's a continual approach that we need to iterate through. So we're able to continually monitor, analyze, solve, and test APIs, and make sure that we're complying with the newest governance, internal or external regulations, and we're able to hit that mark every single time and automate this process, so we're not doing this in a manual way, which then allows us to scale our APIs without scaling our risk associated with those APIs. So as Sonal mentioned earlier, we see a lot of misconception about anonymization. So how do we reach compliance? So how do we remove data that shouldn't be there? And the simple answer is, well, we just anonymize it. But what does that really mean? And anonymization at its core is just the data doesn't relate to an individual, and the data protection is not reversible. So if we think about a very small data set here, for example, where we have a name, date of birth, gender, and a town of someone, we could do something like mask the name. And then you could say, well, this is no longer directly associated to an individual. But we can actually have to be very careful about this. And this approach has bitten quite a lot of companies, where we can use this non-direct information, combine it together, and then actually identify that individual. So if you think about a scenario here, for example, where this individual could be potentially very old in a very small town, and then it can be actually quite an arbitrary exercise to use other information sources, such as voter registries or anything like that, to then identify that individual based on their gender, their age, and their location, simple factors like that. And there's some stats around the percentage of Americans who can be identified by their date of birth, gender, and location. It's around 84% of people in the US can be uniquely identified by those three characteristics. So we really need to think about what data is associated with that as well. So then we can say, okay, right, well, let's just mask everything out, get rid of everything. Fantastic, we're anonymized. That's no longer reversible, and it's no longer related to an individual. Now, the downside of this, as I sort of alluded to slightly earlier with our solve, is it's no longer useful. You've just gotten rid of all your data. So we're trying to walk this fine tightrope between meeting our obligations in terms of hitting compliance, making sure we're meeting all those regulations, but also making sure that we can use our data, because obviously we can't just get rid of everything and make sure we're really compliant that way. And then just down below, we've just got encryption, which again, as Sonal pointed out, is something that we see people use a lot interchangeably with the word anonymization. And yes, I can't see that information there. I can't see who that relates to, but there will be a key that will reverse that and will reveal that information. And that in a lot of contexts is still considered a reversible technique, and therefore is not considered anonymization. So now that we understand a bit more what we're talking about when we say anonymization, we can jump to the next part, which is analyzing the data. Fantastic. We now know we need to do something with it. We need to protect it, but what do we protect and where is it? And this is something that we see as needing to be fundamentally an automatic process. We can't have manual mappings forever going through all new APIs, all new OAS specs that you produce to say, okay, this is a phone number, this is a first name, this is someone's home address. We need this to happen automatically. And this is where we see some of the new machine learning approaches being incredibly powerful tools really to do this. But all good and well, being able to identify in that sort of example sandbox there, sorry, I'm still on the previous slide, being able to identify in that example of that API response from a sandbox that we have, name, but we also need to understand the context. So where's that data? Where's it going? And do we need to understand where within an API it is as well, and how it's being shared, and those different regulation requirements. Another way of thinking about this as well, another signal we can look at for privacy is how's the API being used? Can we look at the request metadata? How often is this API endpoint being hit? Who's requesting it? Where are they requesting it? What time they're requesting it from? Can we use all this information to build this holistic approach to identify where the sensitive information is that we can then act on it? So on the next slide, we can see we're now stepping to solve. And this is now, what are we going to do about this? What do we need to do about this to be able to meet our regulatory requirements? So we have a lot of different techniques that are out there that have been developed in academia to make sure that we remove the data. But what we're really interested in eXate here as well is what can we actually do to help you see as much of the data as you can while we meet those privacy requirements. So on the right, you can see some basic ideas. So we might not need to mask a whole email address. You might be able to get rid of the username and keep the domain name and gain some insights about where that user may be in the world, what type of internet service they're using. And that might, in a particular case, not break regulatory requirements. And that might also differ per user. And this is where this whole system needs to come into the gateway, is the fact that if I am a tester, I might not need to see the email address. But if I am in compliance department within a company, I might need to see the email address. So we can think about these techniques being applied differently for different people to make sure everyone gets the right information at the right time. We can then also just simply remove information if it's not needed, or also look at ideas like, 37 might be someone's age. We might be able to turn that into an age range. So marketing maybe don't need to see everyone's individual age, but might be useful to see what sort of 10-year age range they're in. And then we can actually look at using all the other information around that to ensure it's private. One of the other techniques I just quickly want to touch on is a very exciting one that we see great interest in, which is adding noise to systems as well. Can we actually change the data, make it private, prove it's private, but actually have real numbers associated with it, so the end user doesn't necessarily know it's not the original data? That's probably something more in the future that people interested in, but just showing those possibilities that we get there and this balance that we're going to build between privacy and utility within data sets. So jump to the next slide. Well, that's me done, isn't it? So yeah, sorry, just to round up there, happily on a flow there. There are lots of cool ideas we can work on here, and there's lots of progress we can make in this industry to ensure that APIs are done in a sensible way, scale sensibly, and deliver as much utility with as much privacy as possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. And then just some final thoughts from myself. We're quite excited as a company to see what's actually happening in gateways and how they're looking to do more and more in gateways to enable this data in motion, because we are consuming data in a different way. It's not just about the REST principles. Obviously, most people are now starting in their API programs at some degree looking at GraphQL, but there are the other types, that the event-based systems, the streaming services that are also now getting fronted with this. So it is really, we're very, very excited about what gRPC is going to bring to the table. It is going to mean that another part of what our business also looks at is just data flowing through JDBC connections. We are going to be looking at how that evolves over the course of the next 5 years, and how gRPC could potentially just be a different way on how we're looking to do that. Message queues, Kafka, Rabbit, all of these things are now getting fronted by the gateways, which means that we can proxy them and we can start putting that governance layer there. So it's just a very exciting space. We're really keen to see how we can help with some of those compliance issues around it. I won't go into my last slide. I will leave it there because Prashant's here. That's my cue to say, be quiet now.
So during your section, I think you alluded to privacy going to be a differentiator in the API security. Can you just explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a big part of some of the content that we created, one is we definitely know that these data protection regulations are focused around individuals, around customers, but there are other requirements that you're going to need. There are other sensitive things that we want to consider. When we're looking at API security, it is just looking at protecting the main pipes and the mechanism of how information is traveling. We're not looking at the data that's actually going through it. By being able to do things like see if you're allowed to use data for marketing, see if that individual is given consent, check that you're allowed that data is allowed to go cross jurisdiction. These are the things that you won't get from your typical API security vendors. They're looking at protecting you holistically, but where privacy is going to come into it is taking some of that burden away from your developers. Like, we've all been there. We've had teams of graduates come in, etc. They won't necessarily understand all of these nuances, but we can put a governance structure in place at our gateways and in our API security side of it that can actually help you reduce and minimize that risk. It just takes one individual to just slightly get it wrong. But this means that it is that privacy risk that we're worried about just as much as actually not our APIs not working and being DDoS attacked, all of those sort of things. So they should be going hand in hand. And we want to centralize how we're actually doing that.
Right. Okay. And I think, Fred, to you, Fred, is there a way to quantify the privacy or the risk? That risk to the
so
data?
that's sort of along the lines of what someone was saying there as well. Is that whole approach of actually being able to measure some of these things and give you quantitative numbers back to tell you how private your data is or how much risk is associated with that. So even if you're sharing it in a very secure API, it's actually understanding what's in that message and then being able to associate information around that on how useful that information is and also how private it is.
Okay. Great. Great to know. I mean, great to know about a lot of things, including the privacy enhancing techniques that you shared here. It was a pleasure to have you here, play the role of a host to you at Apidays Dubai and Middle East. I hope you also enjoyed presenting to this audience.
Yep, I hope everyone found it interesting. Thank you so much for having us. It was a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.